by law, is an American required to file income tax returns? Yes or no? At risk of being audited, I am joined today by former IRS revenue agent Sherry Peel Jackson. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's my pleasure, my pleasure.
Okay, you've got a fascinating story. You worked for the IRS and then became the enemy of the IRS,
Yes.
and did some time because of that, which I'd like to get to in a minute. But I'm sure everyone wants to know, by law, is an American required to file income tax returns? Yes or no?
Well, myself and other researchers have not found a law that requires most Americans that live and work in the 50 states to file an income tax return or to pay an income tax. Now, the income tax, as it stands, has been misrepresented and misapplied to the American people. However, they have the guns, and all these people are afraid because of all the things that they've heard about the IRS. So if you don't file, you have a risk of being audited, or worse, going to jail. They won't put you in jail unless you have a big mouth like me. But no, I haven't found a law. No, if you go out online and you see other people like Joe Bannister and you watch America, Freedom and Fascism, you'll see that I'm not the only one that says that. But then there's a risk involved in that. They don't follow the law, obviously.
But really, out of this huge tax code that the U.S. has, there's no law anywhere. There's no part of the code that says you must file.
It's complicated. Title 27 is the excise tax code, and it tells you what kind of tax, who must file, and the calculation of it. Title 26, on the other hand, talks about you have to pay tax on your taxable income. Well, income's never defined in there. And we found that the definition of income is corporate profits. So let me give you a good example so you can break it down. If I come and cut your grass, I'm using my arms, my legs, and my brain to cut your grass, and you give me $100. We consider that an even exchange because I used my time, talent, and my energies to cut your grass, and in exchange you gave me $100. Let's look at Walmart, and let's make it simple. If Walmart makes $100,000 in a day, one Walmart, $100,000. What they do is they get to deduct their expenses. They have the rent for the building, they have the salaries, they have the electricity and all that. And let's say all that adds up to 80 grand. So they got 100 grand, they have 80 grand in expenses, which they can expense, and they only pay tax on the corporate profit, which is 20. So we're paying tax on 100% of our labor, and that is slavery. So we're just basically slaves.
Which I think that gets into your current practice, but first a little bit about what happened to you. So would you like to recount a story of how you went from being an IRS employee to someone being prosecuted and thrown in jail?
Okay, so I worked at the IRS for 7.5 years, thought I was doing my duty, but there's a lot of dynamics that happened over the time. I started seeing things, and one of the things I started to see was that little Joe Blow mom and pop businesses were getting slammed. So let's say I went out and did an audit on Joe Blow and his wife, and they had a small business, and they made some mistakes on their tax return. It came out to them owing $25,000. Well, that hurts a business, a small business. That can really, really hurt them and even close them down. Then, a month later, I'm auditing a larger business, a partnership or a corporation, and they owe $300,000, right? And I turn in the report. But they have attorneys and CPAs that come in and make deals with the IRS attorneys and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, their $300,000 turns into only $25,000. So I didn't think that was fair at all on any different level. And then, it was family reasons that I quit the IRS. But people were afraid to talk to me about the things that they had heard about the income tax prior to me quitting. But when I quit, people started coming out of the woodwork saying, hey, I've heard that the income tax is being misapplied, or it's a fraud, or we're not really liable for the income tax. This thing was made up at Brentwood and all this. And I was listening to them, but, I didn't do anything about it until I saw, and I'm cutting the story short, a USA Today ad put out by We the People Foundation that said, Dear We the People, the income tax is a fraud. And in that full-page color ad, Joe Bannister, which is the former Criminal Investigation Division agent, had his book, and then there was an ad and a reward from a guy named Bill Conklin, $50,000 if you can prove that we have to file and pay. Well, hey, I'll get my chance. I'm going to sit down and tell these people that they have to file and pay. So I started researching because I really, really honestly wanted that 50 grand. So weeks later, months later, I couldn't find it. I said, what is going on here? Why is it so hard for me to and I'm really detailed with my research. Why is it so hard for me to sit down and say, here is the law that requires you to file and pay? So other stuff started coming up, and then I found out about the Federal Reserve. I found out about Ed Griffin's book called The Creature from Jekyll Island. It's a long book, but I sat there and I read that book, and I was fuming because I found out that the Federal Reserve is not federal. It's a private banking cartel that collects over $60 million in interest from the American people every day. I mean, look at the debt clock. The debt clock means this is all the interest that's being collected. And why is that? Because our Congress is supposed to be in charge of the money. But they abdicated that responsibility to a private banking cartel. So I started thinking to myself, I work hard in my little CPA firm down here in my basement. Sometimes I'm working 16 hours a day trying to get reports done, and I'm a Trekkie, so Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock and Dr. McCoy were keeping me awake because I kept putting the tapes in to stay awake to do these reports, just so that I could have a decent life and my family can have some decent vacations. And to find out that all those checks that I was writing to the IRS, they weren't going to fix the roads because the gas tax pays for that. They weren't going to get the schools in place because our real estate taxes pay for that. They were going towards a private banking cartel so that their children and their children's children would never have to work a day in their life. And I got so mad. My head snapped, that black woman head snapped. Wait a minute. I'm not doing this. So I started doing more research and got with Joe Bannister, got his books, and he called, and we got together and started speaking and said, hey, wait a minute, this is a fraud. We started talking about it, and the government got mad.
This leaves me with some questions.
Okay.
For instance, on the Federal Reserve, how do you know that income tax funds go to the Federal Reserve?
There's a report, the Ronald Reagan Commission, Peter Grace. It's the Grace Commission report back in 1984, I believe it was. And I think it's 2,800 page report, but around somewhere in the beginning of it, it says not one nickel of the income tax goes towards running the country. It goes towards servicing the debt, which is the interest from the Federal Reserve. It goes towards war and all these things that we don't want. So the money doesn't go towards running the country. That's a lie that's been told. People say, well, how are we going to run the country? None of that money goes towards running the country. Do your research. Turn off the TV, do your research. It doesn't. So that's an issue right there. The income tax goes towards the interest on the federal debt and war and all this other stuff, entitlements and things, not towards helping us. It's not helping us at all. It's taxation without representation, because I'm sure not represented in Congress or anywhere in the government.
At your time at the IRS, did something like this ever come up in your conversations with your superiors or fellow workers there?
In the 7.5 years I was there, they have a group. Back then, they had groups that they put together to deal with these tax protester people. So the regular people that worked at the IRS did not interact on a regular basis or at all. I never interacted with a person like a Joe Bannister or a person that was telling me this. They kept them apart. And you'd hear jokes about it, like, well, if they don't believe that the money is taxable, then they don't believe it's money. And, they would make jokes about these people, but then nobody ever said anything. Everybody's afraid. Everybody wants to keep their job. People at the IRS make pretty good money as government employees, and they get these pay increases like steps. Yeah. And so somebody, let's say for the sake of argument, somebody that's in collections, if they came in when I came in back in the 80s, in the late 80s, right now they're making about 100 grand. If they stepped out of that and tried to get a collection job, they're probably making 30 grand.
So you didn't have any interaction with this group, as you call it, that dealt with people who are now, in a sense, you've become one of them.
Right. No, they kind of kept it secret because somebody like me and other people that are thinkers are going to start thinking about it. Joe Bannister, for example, he found out about this while he was still a revenue agent, and he did his research on weekends and stuff. So he was still a criminal investigation division agent. I'm sorry, not revenue agent. He was still a criminal investigation division agent, and he started hearing these things and researching, and he left. So I guess they're afraid that people are just going to leave.
And what exactly happened to you? To tell us the story. Okay,
so I left the IRS, and then people started telling me about the fraud, and then I started doing the research, and then I started talking about it. So that was the quote unquote mistake. I started talking about it, and was on the Freedom and Fascism movie. They put me on 60 Minutes, and we were getting around there, and the government got angry. So they had some congressional hearings, and they didn't invite us to speak, but they had our pictures blown up on posters in there and said, we got to shut these people down. And that's when they started prosecuting people. So Joe was the first one. Joe Bannister was the darling of the tax movement, and they prosecuted him, and he won because he is so honest, and he had his team got together and made sure that the jury knew that he believed what he was saying. By the time they got to me, they sent people from Washington, D.C. to Atlanta to prosecute me because they could not take another loss, because they lost to Joe Bannister and they lost to Tommy Cryer 3 months before my trial. So I didn't even get to talk about the law. The judge kept saying, I will instruct the jury on the law, and she wouldn't let me talk about what I had learned. And it was a 3-ring circus, and of course, with the jury being so afraid, what I wanted to ask the jury, what I wanted my attorneys to ask the jury is this: would you be afraid to acquit Miss Jackson for fear of being IRS audited, getting an IRS audit? And I know all of the hands would have gone up, but he wasn't allowed to do that. So these people are afraid of the IRS, and they come back, well, you're guilty because you have to pay, and so that's where people are. And so,
what were the charges on which you were convicted?
Willful failure to file. I did not file tax returns. I stopped filing tax returns when I found out. So willful failure to file is a misdemeanor, right? So I wasn't indicted. When you indict somebody, that's a felony, but it's called an information. So they filled out an information. They charged me with willful failure to file for 4 years. And guess what they did? They gave me a 4-year sentence instead of doing a concurrent. A misdemeanor, the definition of misdemeanor is jail for 1 year or less. But they gave me a 4-year sentence on a misdemeanor charge. Sure did. Yeah.
So there, as far as you're aware, there's no law requiring you to
I haven't
file.
found it.
However, there's a law for failure to file.
Well, no, it's some regulations that they put together. In other words, what they did was, I don't want to call it ingenious, but all of those codes and regulations all mixed together, they made penalties for failure to file, but you have to be required to file. Some people are required to file, depending on what kind of income you have, but most people that live and work in the 50 states are not in that.
So who's required to file?
Foreign corporations, Americans that are living abroad, and for the privilege, other people that come in here for the privilege of being able to work in the United States. So, for example, we get all this junk from China. China is supposed to be paying us a ton of money, like an excise tax for sending all that stuff over here. But somewhere along the line with Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky and the blue dress or whatever, China got most favored nation status. So all of the tax that all these other countries and some of the foreign corporations are supposed to be paying has been laid on the middle class. Now, wealthy people they don't pay a lot of tax because they have all these loopholes that the poor people don't have. And they have the loopholes because the people that write these little codes and stuff give them loopholes. So the tax code as it's written is made for businesses. But all of us that work every day, we are expending our life energy every day in exchange for resources so that we can live. And that's an even exchange, no matter how you look at it. So even if you believe that there's a law, it's not moral because it's slavery. And what I always say is, if you are taking someone's labor at 100% and you are exploiting their labor and it's slavery, at what percentage is it not slavery?
I've heard sometimes people change the acronym to "it's really stealing," but
Right.
I guess your point is it's really slavery.
It is. Think about how slavery is. You go over there and work, and I'll give you a little food and water, and then you work every day. Well, what's the difference? I mean, most of the people that are in the grind, they're just surviving. We're sick of just surviving. We want to thrive too.
But you basically teach people now how to break free from this slavery.
Right. So 95 to 99% of the people are not going to stand up and try to cut the head off the beast like I did. And I don't recommend that because I don't want anybody to go through what I went through at the hands of the beast. But what I do now is help people starve the beast. So most people are going to say, okay, I believe you and all that, but I'm too scared not to file because I don't want to go to jail and I don't want to take my stuff. So there are ways that you can work within the system and not have a risk of going to jail, but still keep more of what you earn. And that's what I teach people.
And you want to give a couple examples? Of
Well,
how
an
you can do
example
that?
of that is, you got a job and you want to make sure that I just got an email this morning from somebody that said they made $38,000. They took $10,000 out, and the IRS on the 2019 tax return is still saying they owe $800 more. So this person made with $38,000 and is supposedly owing $10,800. That's just crazy. It's just crazy. So what you do is you can start a home-based business. Remember, I said that they have the tax code, all, whatever it is, and it's for businesses. So if you start a business, then you can deduct things that you already do, like your cell phone. That's a deduction. Your internet, all these things that normally that you're paying for, they can become business deductions, and that's what businesses do. Do you know a lot of corporations like Netflix and all these people, they don't pay taxes because they have all these deductions, and a lot of wealthy people have all these loopholes and deductions. Well, the American people need to learn these things and not just stay focused on having a job, which is okay, but do something different. When you come home, don't turn on the electronic income reducer called the TV. Don't turn it on. Decompress, eat your dinner, spend some time with your family, and then do a business. You can make money and you have all these deductions, and that's basically one of the biggest things that people can do to help themselves get out of the rat race.
What about going overseas or offshore, as some people like to say?
That's something for people who have gotten a little bit further on. After you're beginning and after you're making money in your business, then yeah, you can start corporations abroad, and you can start businesses abroad, and making sure that money is overseas. And there's a lot of things you can do. But for the beginner, just go ahead and get your home-based business.
Ms. Jackson, thank you very much. Very fascinating story, and probably some useful information for whoever's tuned in.
Hopefully so.
Thanks a lot, and enjoy your stay in Mexico.
Thanks for having me. Alrighty.